So we'll start with some brief introductions. Oh, I'm not sitting there. I'll stand here. There we go. So we'll start with some brief introductions. Dan, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Daniel Doherty. I'm Virtual Construction Manager at Clark Builders out of Edmonton, Alberta. I've been there for about 5 years. My primary role is basically to facilitate the use of BIM into construction. It's been a interesting journey, but it continues, and it's actually really interesting to see the momentum within industry heading in that direction. So it'll be interesting to see what the other panelists think of where we're going in the future.
Good. Lucas.
Yeah, Lucas Epp. I'm head of the engineering department at StructureCraft. For those of you around this morning, you heard a bit about what we do. So I'm in charge of a team of about 10 3D modelers and structural engineers working with prefabrication and installation of timber structures.
Great. And Charles?
I'm Charles Lehman. I'm senior architect and BIM specialist with Bing Tom Architects. Most of you know, kind of Bing's work, and we are interested in complex, very organic buildings we build worldwide. And we started implementing BIM about 10 years ago now, and all of our major projects are now BIM.
Right on. And Matt?
Matt Goldsberry with HDR, Digital Design Principal, leading up our computation design efforts across the company. So a lot of pursuits, a lot of design development, a lot of workflow stuff too. So anything, like I was mentioning, my interest is finding the limits of programming and software and expanding that. So it tends to feed into a lot of different parts of our company.
Right on. Okay, so my first question, and Matt, I'll direct this to you first.
Sure.
Potential use for BIM beyond design. How are we using it right now, and how can we better utilize it? Obviously, you talked about that during your presentation with computational design. Talk a little bit about how we're currently using this type of technology in BIM, and then where you see it can move forward to simply, and how we're using it at the moment.
Yeah, so, in terms of like what's driving, I'm interested in like what's driving changes in BIM. And like the advancements in technology. So for instance, like one thing that we've been doing, and we've been doing more and more, is looking to the gaming environment, where we're creating our own custom gaming environments and embedding huge amounts of data into those models, both for viewing, for accessibility to viewing, easier use of the model and faster. So I'm looking for other industries and what industries are advancing technology really fast. So the reason sensors are advancing really fast right now is because of automated cars and all the money that's going into driverless cars. So as a result, sensors are driving a lot of innovation. So I'm looking for industries like that are then pushing into, and how the architecture AEC industry can take advantage of that. Interesting.
Dan, how do you feel that we can utilize BIM beyond the design process, coming from a construction standpoint?
Well, as it was previously brought up, I would love to see the model become the contract document. Do away with the paper documents, move to mobile devices, and use the actual model to build the building. When you have that kind of development or detail within a model, it leads into, again, what has been brought up before is prefabrication opens up all sorts of doors for prefab. Beyond trusses and steel is usually prefabricated. Wall panels, we're looking at complete systems, rooms. I see that becoming very mainstream very quickly. But yeah, the main thing is I'd like to see the model become contract document and move away from paper-based construction into mobile construction, mobile app construction.
So Lucas and Charles, so Lucas, obviously prefabrication has an impact on your industry. Where do you see as going beyond, like to what level do you see as doing more prefab? And Charles, how do you see that having an impact on how we design? So Lucas first.
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, BIM is already used in pretty much, or the concept of BIM is already used in pretty much every bit of prefabrication that happens to some degree or other at the moment. But I think moving forward to, like Dan was saying, taking the model into the field, that's something that's starting to happen, but maybe not, I think there's a lot more that could be done there. And I think really what we're waiting for there is the software industry to catch up and provide responsive apps that really give you the information that you're trying to get to on your mobile device. Right now it's, if you're dealing with any type of large model, it's very clunky to be able to try to navigate around it, typically on a mobile device. And, if you tap a wall, you may not be getting what you're wanting to get out of, the information out of that wall. So I think the software industry really is still catching up in our construction industry compared to some of the other industries. Having said that, really cloud software, I think, is definitely the way of the future, as we've seen with Autodesk is moving there, as are many other vendors. So, I mean, we're actually very interested in starting to do some of our own programming in the web. So we've done some research and we've started to actually do some of that, and I showed a bit of that earlier in my presentation, where we're actually allowing our parametric models to, for example, live sync directly to the web. So a client across the world could be seeing the iterations of design in real time with us and sectioning and commenting on the 3D model in real time. So I think that whole real-time collaboration is really a big thing for the future.
Right. So Charles, are architects utilizing that technology?
Well, I'd say part of the frustration maybe for designers is that we're increasingly either working within a paradigm where everything is fairly understood, known, where you're being conventional, and therefore things are predictable. And within that realm, there's maybe less of an opportunity to, or it's less urgent for use of something like IDP and BIM and interoperability, vertical integration in the industry, right? Because everyone's working within that existing paradigm. They know what they're doing. They know how much it's going to cost. There's no risk involved. As soon as you get into a slightly more interesting building, or as soon as you start innovating with parts of it, you're not in that paradigm where everyone understands what you're doing. We're working in a kind of vacuum all of a sudden. There's very little information, right, coming to us from the industry who actually make these things about what they can or can't do and how much things cost, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the big opportunity that's available out there, is when the people who make the stuff, the prefabricators, the product manufacturers, start giving us these parametric models, parametric objects ready to use, that we can start playing with them, right? And we're going to need a little bit of a standardization in the industry, I think, and a kind of agreement within the industry about how this goes about. Let's say like a really good database of materials. And where these materials are, they're the actual materials with all of their physical characteristics available in the marketplace associated with their cost, and embedded within those definitions are things like what modules those materials come in, how they can be manipulated within a shop, what kind of tools get used on them, that kind of thing, right? And the other one would be simply an actual electronic marketplace for building products, where you can take a BIM model, extract the quantities from it, and get a price out of an actual marketplace, something like an Amazon, but for building products.
I might, if I can, just pick up on that. It's a really interesting concept, and I can see the struggles, because as a designer, if you're not aware of all the constraints, how do you design efficiently? Or how do you even design interestingly with what you're given? And the challenge, of course, from the fabricator's side or the product manufacturer's side is that the cost of an object or a product will, of course, vary depending on how you configure it, where it is, what the labor rate is, and so many other constraints that it's very hard to predict. And so, we did a bit of thinking about that, actually. Could we give away some sort of approximate unit pricing on our website as kind of a live pricing app to know roughly what would a structure like this with this type of structural grid cost dollars a square foot? And when you start thinking about that, the minute you put that out there, your competitors know what those numbers are first, the biggest challenge. The second thing, of course, is that it means that people make assumptions based on those numbers that you can't get cheaper or you can't get more expensive depending on where you are or what you do. And so it's a very tricky thing, I think, to really put hard numbers in. But I think material properties, that's something where we could definitely do much better at, making, for example, the environmental impacts of materials widely available and known.
So do you think, and Charles, you mentioned this about standardization across the industry, do you think that would be a platform that we can utilize to integrate BIM more into our industry? Is that...
Well, but certainly on the cost side, I find it fascinating. To me, it's the most obvious use for the technology of the building model as a database of components is to do costing on it. And yet, I don't know of any cost specialist who've really committed to just doing this at all. And it's puzzling, right? But I'd say, yeah, maybe that's an example of somewhere where some standardization and an opportunity exists there for doing something rather quickly, I would think, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Dan, what do you feel about integration of BIM further in the industry?
Well, just on a costing standpoint, we quantify models all the time. The problem is that there's always some ambiguity with the materials that were used. It's always left up to, it varies from the specification. There's design intent, and then it's really a value engineering process as to what we can do with it. A lot of the times the models aren't accurate enough to get the proper information, so we end up going back to the documents, and the subs will end up pricing it. I think it really needs to be kind of a virtual prototype of your building before construction, and then it provides that assurance of your quantities, and you can double check, and you actually know exactly what you're up against. The problem we run into all the time is if it's not a specific, we run into a lot of generic materials because it's yet to be determined. It has to do with future design, so we'll start construction, and we're still picking out materials, we're still picking out finishes. So it's always in flux. It's something that I've struggled with a lot is try to get a model that we can actually price. It's low-hanging fruit as far as I'm concerned. We should be able to quantify this very quickly, but we don't get the information we need. It's just not there. So I think we need to find a better process to get that done. If it's not integrated product delivery, it's just all getting on the same team beforehand.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's a struggle.
So as part of the integrated process, could possibly do that.
It could, yeah, it definitely could.
Help along the way. So, moving on a little bit here, Matt, technology. So some of us feel that technology that is pushing the software and how we use it, or do you think it's the other way? Do you think we're pushing and developing technology and there's a demand for it?
Well, I think that dichotomy is, the result of that dichotomy is why the popularity in Grasshopper and Dynamo, because I don't think our industry, like for example, like in entertainment industry, like they make enough money that they can just build all their own software, and then that software becomes bigger than that one entity, and it goes beyond, and now in design and architecture we're using that software, and so I don't think that's really happening like in architecture. So we're not just building massive pieces of program and then selling it to other industries, but what we are doing is building small custom workflows using Dynamo, using Grasshopper, using just custom code to write our own applications. And to me, now it's our industry driving how software is being used.
Right. Okay.
I think one thing that we're starting to see more and more, and it's starting slowly here in Canada, but one thing I definitely saw while I was in the UK is the education industry. People are starting to learn to program, whether it's visual programming or actual scripting, during university. And I think that's incredibly important because we're seeing a whole paradigm shift in when the skill sets we need from young graduates in engineering, contracting, and architecture, obviously. And so I think that's something that we should be pushing here in our environment.
Yeah, for sure.
I read that they're starting to teach elementary school students how to program in certain countries.
So Charles, the technology versus the traditional process. So architecture's been around for hundreds of years, technology not so much. How do you see the adoption of the use of technology in the architectural field?
Yeah, I mean, we're very much in the middle of it now. For example, visual programming and the use of Rhino in school now it's a really significant part of the design studio now, right? So I think that shift is going to start happening faster now, that people have let go of their dependence on traditional forms of representation, on using pen and paper, or the poor digital equivalencies to the pen and paper, right? Because that's really the transition that we're looking at, is making that shift from using the computer to produce paper to just plain creating digital models. It's happening slowly, that's all.
Okay. So Dan, who's demanding those digital models? Is it the architect saying this is the tool we want to use? Is it construction saying we want to use it for these benefits? Or are we seeing demand from our clients?
It really depends on the project. I would love to see the clients demand more of it. I know the designers use it because it's a more efficient tool to produce documents, but then there's a disconnect from that information between the designers and the contractors. I always like to explain it as there's design BIM, there's construction BIM, and there's facilities management BIM. And right now, it seems to be there's a disconnect between each one of those. And really, to be efficient, you have to combine all three of those. And in order to do that, you have to have a client at the beginning and say, this is what I want to use the model for. I guess you don't have to, but ideally it would be a lot easier because then it would allow us the time at the beginning of the design process to plan all that information that has to go in it through the value chain. There are some projects where the team will get together, say one of our design build projects, where we will drive the use of BIM just for our needs. I mean, we'll pick consultants that have the ability to do that. And we'll, because it's a design build, we can sort of dictate, extra information that we want to put into the model for costing purposes, or, by all means, it's not full costing, but we can put in information for certain cost drivers of the project, so we can pay better attention to it, so we don't have such dramatic design changes down the road. I have yet to see a client ask for any kind of facilities data in that. I think that's kind of the key. If once we have clients on board and understand the value, what can come with the models, then they'll start asking for it in the RFPs. Even the IPD projects that come in and are stated as an IPD, there's no BIM deliverables. It's more of you tell us how you're going to use BIM, and at that point it creates a struggle because everybody has vested interest on how they want to use the model, and then you're modifying typical scopes of work, and it becomes a little bit problematic. So I'd like to see the clients drive it. I think both designers and contractors both understand that there's value to be had there in both sides, but we just need to integrate them a little farther.
See, I think I disagree with part of that statement. I don't think the client should have anything to do with it whatsoever. I think ultimately the client are people who are going to, use and occupy the building, and they don't need to have any expertise about the building whatsoever. The people who are going to maintain and operate, yes, and that's not necessarily the client, and I think in most cases increasingly won't be, because there's an existing paradigm that comes from, this baggage of the construction industry where we vehemently reject the idea that the building is a product the way everything else is, right? And the design, build, bid paradigm is all around this idea that you're not delivering a product, but you really are. And in that paradigm, the contractor increasingly is going to be delivering a product which they're going to be responsible for, for warrantying and doing operation and maintenance the same way as when you buy a car today, it comes with this extended warranty and you don't have to do anything. They even do the oil change for you, right? And in that paradigm, it makes sense that the contractor is the one who hires the architect and the architect and the consultants to create a better product, a more integrated, intelligent, cost-effective product.
So is it a better product? Are we producing a better quality product, or are we just adding more complexity to products? Given that, the cathedrals in Europe were built in these very complex buildings with elaborate masonry with 3 sheets of paper. So Dan, you want to say something?
I had a rebuttal there that kind of derailed it. I just wanted to comment on that. I think that the client needs to demand it. If they want to use the digital information for anything besides construction, say they want an as-built model so they can tie it into facilities even down the road, they have to demand that. If they don't demand it, then we end up with a Frankenstein set of documents at the end, because once the model is done, it goes back into the usual contract administration process, and we end up building off 8.5 by 11s and taping them to the project, and then that's where your BIM ends. So I still think the client needs to be on board with it, or else we don't get the full product in the end. Especially if they retain their assets, because I think the numbers are 90% of building costs are post-construction, and if you want to really get the efficiency out of it, you have to be able to drive that at the beginning of the design process. Otherwise, it costs, I forget the numbers, it's up to 10 times more to put all that information in the model after the fact. So, we don't need the client to drive it. I think we should be able to do it, as design constructors, just based on the efficiency we get. But if we want to move beyond that, and like I say, integrate design through facilities management, then the client needs to be on board with that. Because there's a lot of extra work that has to be done to create that as-built model that's usually outside the typical scope of work. So it's going to adjust fees. Back to your question, if you wanted to repeat that,
I forgot what it was.
You'd ask whether our construction is getting better or not.
Are we producing is BIM helping us produce a better quality product, or are we just adding complexity to these?
I think we've added significant complexity to our buildings when you compare it with any type of ancient building. Geometrically, obviously, they managed some incredibly complex things, but that was primarily due to the master craftsmen of the time and the skills they had amassed over many years of trial and error in not many instances. Right. But I think now we have much, much more complex, almost living buildings with the amount of systems that we have going through our buildings. And so I think, we're like you said, we're moving more towards a building as a product. And I think we need to be thinking that way and hearing more and more about sensors and knowing about how your building's performing in use.
And on it, we have been creating a better product because that product is more efficient. BIM has allowed us to, not only, design better, but test to the designs and optimize the designs and become more efficient in putting them together, reducing materials because we can try many different iterations of even routing pipes and ducts, So I think BIM has definitely allowed us to create a better product in the end.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about being able to interrogate the BIM models you create. Communication is key, like I said earlier in my talk. If we have an amazing BIM model, but the end user or anybody in the food chain can't use that to its full effect, then all of a sudden you lose the momentum going forward. So I think it's very important that we focus on, you know, the software industry actually really focuses on creating usable BIM models.
So Matt, how can the software industry help us create usable BIM models?
Well, that's what I was going to say. We create these huge models, but and they're better. We got a lot more detail in them, but we quite haven't solved how we can access those models in a lot better way. I mean, that's like the last slide I was showing with the Power BI, where you ask it a question and it tells you how big your building is. I would like to see the BIM model do the same way. You can just intuit. You could, instead of Siri, would be another name for Siri for the Revit model, but you can simply just ask it questions and access information. And that, like I was saying, that's some of the things that we've been messing around with in the gaming environment, is creating these really robust game models that have a lot of the BIM information that's embedded into that game engine, so then you can just run around the model and find drawings.
So that being said, do you think the final deliverable that we're moving towards is a more interactive model at all levels? So not only just the designers and the consultants, but also the marketplace. So involving the marketplace to have an input.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way. That's the only way to get. I mean, that's like, it's like a smartphone. It's like we went from these digital phones that nobody really used to a phone that has every single app on it. So that, being a deliverable for these buildings, like the fact that we could create a document that, everyone across the industry could plug in and be part of the deliverable to the client that they use.
And that we could start to see buildings as a whole integrated system again, because if you go back to, I keep thinking of the Lionsgate Bridge. That was done on, I can't remember what it was, but somewhere between 5 and 10 drawings, the entire bridge.
Really?
And you think about that, and you think what a bridge would have today, talking thousands of drawings and shop drawings, and the amount of time it takes to get your head around the bridge as a concept compared to what it used to. And I think being able to get back to that single central source of information now with a model, which is easily interrogatable, we could be returning to that ease of communication.
So I guess in the past, when there was 5 or 10 sheets of drawings, the building information model really was in the designer's head, who typically was on site the whole time during construction.
And they pack the drawings full. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a look at it. Google them. Like, it's worth looking at them. They're incredible drawings.
Yeah, interesting. Dan, how do you feel about an integrated model that also includes elements from the marketplace? How do you think that would have an impact on your costing? Think you'd be able to refine that to an nth degree, or is there still going to be more flexibility?
Well, I think it would be interesting if we could make the model with the proper materials in it available to a wider variety of people to price. I've heard the idea of making it available to open public to actually price the project out, so we as contractors can pick not only the best product but the best price throughout a global marketplace. I don't know how feasible that is, but it's an interesting idea. The problem is if the model isn't built specifically for pricing purposes, it contains a lot of ambiguity, and that's where we run into some issues. I don't really have a good answer for that, actually.
Okay. So next question, contractual obligations versus fees. So, we've talked about BIM in the early stages of BIM having an impact on fee because we're front loading the model. And really we haven't seen much of a change in the fee structure due to that. What do you think the contractual obligations are? Do you think they're going to change and evolve according to the complexity of the models? Or do you think that's really going to maintain the same path that it's been going down, and we will just change the deliverable at the end of it?
I think that's a question that in itself belongs in that old paradigm. Fee structures do need to change. I think that's really up to the industry and the firms to, make those decisions as businesses. And it's really up to the marketplace to some extent to decide and distinguish between the quality of service that they are getting out of one firm versus another, and make that value decision. I think there's a limit to how much we can interfere with that. Maybe, there may be an issue structurally, not related to BIM at all, about the competitive situation of the architectural firm and engineering firm versus the client that's currently determining fees. Education to some extent on the part of clients in terms of choosing, value versus low front end fees.
Okay.
I think if a fee structure may have to change, but I think it's more to do with an integrated process. It's more to do with change in scopes of work. For example, I would rather have the mechanical engineer provide me with a performance specification and go straight to the contractors for the modeling than have an additional fee for the mechanical engineer to do all that modeling. Because when you get to the actual construction, a lot of times they don't have the knowledge of, say, code restrictions and stuff, and we end up changing the design anyway on site. So I'd like to see just a change in scopes of work. It might, I'm not entirely sure how that would affect the different fees through all the different stakeholders, but I definitely see the scopes of work changing between all the stakeholders. And it's something that, it's a touchy subject for some consultants, and it's just not, nobody's quite sure how to approach that yet, at least in the market that I'm in.
So with that, we're seeing more participants in the building information modeling process. Lucas is a perfect example of that, having somebody to come in to prefabricate a certain aspect of the building. Liability obviously takes a bit large factor in that, and then the liability around the model. So who ultimately has the liability on the deliverable? So is it the architect designing, or is it the engineer, or is it how is liability going to play a factor in how we model?
Yeah, we typically will always create our own model. I've never worked on a project where we haven't had to create our own model primarily from scratch. I mean, obviously with reference information, but and we generally take ownership, because generally when you get down to the letter of the contract, you as a contractor or as a subcontractor are responsible for making sure that everything fits and everything goes together and everything meets the intent of the design documents. So if there's a dimension that wasn't snapped to the right place or something wasn't perfectly coordinated in the Revit model, that's the contractor's responsibility generally, not the design team's.
Right. Okay. Charles, what do you think about liability and
again,
like I
think we go back to that. The idea is like that's essentially part of the existing paradigm that needs to change. Is this siloing and sequentiality of the designers do something and they hand it over to the contractor, and then the contractors basically start all over because they got handed something that was mostly entirely wrong. Right, is the basic argument, right? And it makes no sense that the people who are making the thing aren't involved and participating in the process of conceptualizing the thing. Yeah.
Whoever solves that at a large scale is going to make a lot of money. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically what you're talking about is some form of a design assist or an integrated delivery process. And,
Yep.
I mean, that's how we get involved in most of our projects. So we get involved with architects much earlier on and kind of try to inform those constraints of fabrication and installation. But it doesn't have when you've got a much more building with timber is maybe a bit of a new thing here in North America. You go to steel or concrete, and that's all very well defined, and that does not happen generally. And so you end up in the case where your typical structural engineer or your typical architect may not have a very good idea in his or her mind about what is the most efficient way to do a moment connection in steel, or what's the most efficient way to design a steel truss, or any other number of things. And so you end up with design documents that may not be as efficient as they could be.
Yeah, and then that impacts how you're routing the HVAC system, which needs to be designed to that level of detail because we need to know if we have enough ceiling space and so on. So you can't have the engineers doing half of the job. They do the whole job. They model everything because they should know. And if they don't, then maybe we just directly deal with the contractors and cut them out of the process, because what's the point?
I'll answer that right now. We don't have enough ceiling space. Ever. No, it's true. It seems like there's a huge redundancy in construction because we have the design intent, it moves on to the construction, and it's almost redesigned. The steel redesigns the connections, the mechanical guys redesign, the routing, the ducts change. Everything seems to change from design to construction, and it's one of my pet peeves. I see this huge redundancy, and I believe the integrated process, and that's when I talk about different scopes of work is one way to solve that. Take a big chunk of the scope out of mechanical consultants and give it to the mechanical contractors, and get rid of that redundancy. Then we're incorporating constructability and codes and maintenance and stuff in the design before we're faced with it on site.
Interesting. Okay, so we got a few minutes left, so a little bit of crystal ball gazing. Matt, visualization and computational design. Where do you see us going direction-wise in the future, in the near future and in the distant future?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I always describe it as, it's like, we always think, it's like AutoCAD, Revit, it's going to be the next, what's the next big program? But I think reality, it's going to be a huge amount of small plugins, whether it's a really small custom plugin or a larger package plugin. But we're going to see this huge landscape of plugins that either are developed by the firm themselves or by independent people just wanting to share in the community, and that those types of workflows are going to feed that specific work. So if that firm does a lot of healthcare, or they do a lot of hospitality, the workflows and the custom plugins that they create are very specific to what they do.
So Charles, do you think that the role of architects are going to change from building designers to computer programmers or computer guidance
Yeah.
in generating options?
Yeah, I think the role of the architect and designer is going to increasingly be removed from the design of specific buildings and involved in the design of systems, the design of algorithms, of grasshopper routines and so on, which are going to plug into one another to generate a prototype, which will then be used to generate specific building designs. And yes, it's a very new way of thinking of design as an act of object-oriented programming, essentially. Yeah.
Right, interesting. So Lucas, BIM and fabrication at all levels?
How it's going to move forward?
How it's going to move forward. So from fabrication to the large structures to the small projects?
One thing we probably didn't talk about a whole huge amount today was CNC and the way automation in fabrication is going to change things. And wood is actually a really interesting example because it's actually one of the most easy materials to mill and to CNC, really. A lot easier than steel is. And so you can actually create incredibly complicated geometries or even complicated modules or boxes or whatever you may have quite cheaply with CNC machines. So, and it's happening to a large extent already in Europe, but I think more and more here in North America, we're going to see a lot more firms capable of using CNC machines to, immediately generate quite complex pieces at a reasonably cheap cost.
Right.
And that will definitely impact, what is an efficient way to design with material. What traditionally may have been efficient may become something different.
So you think it's going to have more of a wide spread across materials and other aspects of the industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, steel already is, pretty much every piece of steel you handle is being handled with some sort of numerically controlled machine. So that's already happening. Steel to some extent, though, because of the nature of the material, doesn't get milled quite the same way as timber does. It's more, you're more dealing with cuts and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it has potentially more ability to impact building with wood than it does with steel.
Okay. So Dan, crystal ball gazing, the impact of BIM in the construction industry with prefab, modularization, 3D printers,
Yes.
yeah, all of the above?
Prefabrication I see is going to be huge. And then the automation of prefabrication, robotics are going to come into, I think are going to be a big in the future. I don't know how long, but I can see buildings starting to be put together on an assembly line. I know China has been doing something similar. They're not fantastic pieces of architecture. They're very utilitarian, but they can put a 35-story high-rise together in 8 days. It's pretty amazing, and move the people in the next day. They're fully finished. If we want to go way into the future, I see 3D printing actually being, a printer being constructed on site to print the building out. Different ways of hollow core concrete and stuff you can print out. I think just the automation of construction with robotics is going to be big in the future.
So is that going to change how we interact with our clients? Is it going to be more our clients ordering a building online from a selection of components and check marking who you want as the construction company?
That sounds very boring, very boring architecture to me, but no, I don't see it going that direction. I just think it'll be, hybrid. Instead of being completely human labor, it'll be, robotics or addition of that to, at least in the short term.
Yeah, assisted by technology.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you very much, guys. Any questions from the audience?
Kind of going beyond building, not just beyond BIM, watching kind of the model of T3 and kind of the erection process that's been kind of planned, is there thought given on any of your projects at this point in time by owners to deconstruction of their buildings using the backwards process? Because I think it's BIM in Finland, one of their 5 pillars is sustainability, and that's kind of, I was reading an article about that, and so I just wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, very few owners want to pay to be able to have their building deconstructed. That's the simple reality. But I'd say when you have modular components, it inevitably makes it easier for something like that to happen. On that particular job, it's actually funny you mentioned it. The way we've actually come up with the connections and to lend itself to an efficient direction strategy has also meant that it's actually pretty easy to take the whole thing apart again. There's a few places where you need to cut some bolts and this and that and the other, but to a large extent, the timber component of that structure could actually be demounted completely. I highly doubt that will ever happen because generally when you start thinking about it at a detailed level, it's more cost prohibitive than building again. But the potential's there for sure.
There's just on that there's an interesting YouTube video out there of is for single family homes, but it's optimized for solar cells to follow the sun, so it actually moves with the sun. But it's designed to basically be packed up and moved to a different city if you want to move. I'm trying to remember the name of the company. It'll come to me soon, I'm sure. But in terms of large scale buildings, it's a lot more problematic. But on just single family homes, there are companies that are actually working on that. A permanent structure that can be demoed, taken apart, loaded up, and moved to a different site and reconstructed.
Really?
I'd like to see more of that, actually. It sounds...
Ties into flex design and the cradle to grave theory of construction.
And to your point, Scott, about are we going to see buildings that you can go to a website and configure your building and hit order? And to the point that creates pretty uninteresting architecture. I mean, when you think about it, we already have quite a lot of uninteresting architecture around us. Go to any local industrial, and they're all the same. And so I think for those types of buildings, they're not going to stop being created because they're dirt cheap. And I think we will start to see, very, low unit cost pricing readily available for those types of buildings, and potentially, larger companies at a more international level prefabricating those types of buildings.
And that's the thin edge of the wedge, right? I mean, when we talk about disruptive technologies, disruptive innovation, right? It's never a process where an industry shifts, an industry gets supplanted, and that happens through that process of the thin edge of the wedge. The people who start with those easily reproduced buildings, those easily understood, boring buildings, they start there, right? But then they slowly eat away at the market as they get better at it and are able to make more and more complex, more and more interesting buildings through that process. They end up taking over, right?
Interesting. Good. Any last final comments or thoughts?
I just hope whoever takes over building those buildings is going to be like Tesla or Apple.
Apple buildings. Great. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time today. I certainly appreciate your comments.